Good morning, everybody. Good to see you. Another beautiful day. This time of year, it's, you just want to, you would like to be able to soak in every day. Well, actually, what you'd like to be able to do is to take these days and kind of space them out, over the course of the year. You could put one in February and one in August and just enjoy it. But we get them grouped together. We need to enjoy them as much as we can. Thank you for your interest in spiritual things. Appreciate the guests being here that we have. Appreciate your interest in spiritual things and being with us. I want to talk to you this morning about the most traumatic event of my life. It took place in August 1992. And it was when 2 pink lines appeared on a pregnancy test. And it really was. It truly was the most traumatic event of my life. I was 21 years old. I had been married for 2 months. I was living in the Czech Republic, or Czechoslovakia at that time. And Amanda and I were being supported about $400 a month, which even in 92 was not a lot of money. And we had talked about having children before we had gotten married. We'd had that discussion, and the discussion went something like me saying, well, I'm pretty sure I never want to have children, and Amanda saying, well, I'm okay with that. And I had not changed my mind in the 2 months that we had been married. And so it was really, as I said, very, very traumatic. This was not what I wanted. We had plans. And the plans were for us to spend at least a year help building up the church there in České Budějovice. And then we were going to move back to the United States, probably go to Texas. Amanda already had her degree in education. She was going to get a job teaching. I had 2 more years of college. I was going to spend that time and finish up college. And then we would go on to whatever the next phase of our life was. This didn't fit in with those plans. And we were not quite sure how it was going to change all of those plans. At first, I did not accept this or believe this, and Amanda was pretty certain that the test was accurate. And when I finally became convinced that it was, I went silent. Amanda's remembrance of this is that for 3 days I didn't speak to her. And that was terrifying for someone who'd been married 2 months in a foreign country. And I suspect that she was right, because I remember what those 3 days were like, and I remember what I was dealing with at that time. And it wasn't that I was worried about how we were going to afford having a child. I didn't have any concept of what a child may cost. I probably would have been worried about it if I would have had some concept, but I had no concept of that. So that wasn't my concern. I was very bothered by the idea that the plans that we had made would probably drastically change, and not just immediately, not just like, well, how's this going to affect the next 12 months or the next 3 years? It was like, well, our plans are changed for life, basically, And that was very concerning to me. But that wasn't what was the greatest source of dread. The greatest source of dread was the responsibility. There was so much about parenting that I didn't have a clue about. But one thing that I did understand is that it was probably the greatest responsibility that is placed upon a person. And I got that. A life was being entrusted to us that it would be our task to nourish and protect and who knows what else, And I got that. I didn't have any idea probably how many sacrifices that it would require, but I knew how selfish I was and how much selfishness I had in me. And I wasn't fond of giving that up. And I knew that I was going to have to. And so that was really the struggle of that time. And I just kept thinking about Ephesians chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with you and that you may live long on the earth. And you fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the teaching and admonition, or the training and admonition of the Lord. That passage I remember weighing very heavily on me because I knew that passage, pretty well. I had it committed pretty much to memory, and I remember thinking of the responsibility that went along with that. Because what that passage tells us in the first verse is it defines for us what is the relationship, the parent-child relationship. Children, obey your parents. What that means is that authority is being entrusted to the parents. Children are being commanded by God to obey their parents, which means the authority God has placed upon the parents, and authority has tremendous responsibility with it. And parents are supposed to use that authority in such a way that it is well with the child. In other words, it's in their best interest. So it's not just authority and saying, hey, you got to do what I tell you to do. It's, I've got to tell you what to do and to do things that are going to be in your best interest. And I don't like being an authority figure particularly, because that involves having to make and enforce decisions that directly affect the well-being of the one that I have authority over. And I was not fond of that responsibility. I'm still not fond of that responsibility, because it's a very, very weighty responsibility to do what is truly best for someone else. To do that, to fulfill that responsibility, there's several things you have to have. You have to have a knowledge of what's going to be best for somebody. You just think about when you find out that, oh, we're going to be parents. We're going to have to nourish this child. What's best for a child when to eat when they're little, Well, you got to learn those type of things. And those are the simple type things. And it becomes much more complex from there. I've got to learn and to understand what is going to be best. I can't just go with the flow and say, well, I'm sure it'll all turn out okay. I've got to acquire knowledge and understanding of what's going to be most beneficial for them. And then another heavy responsibility in that is I've got to model what's going to be best for them. I've got to be an example of what's best for them. I can't just tell them, okay, here, you do this because this is best for you, when I'm not doing it. I've got to do that, which means I'm going to have to get rid of a lot of my selfish practices and start doing better in that. Heavy responsibility that goes along with that. And something else that comes with the responsibility of authority is facing and enduring resistance against your leadership. That happens in every position of authority. There will be resistance against your leadership. Much of parenting is your children not liking your decisions. That's a lot of it. That resistance to leadership starts early and it lasts pretty much all of adolescence. And I'm not talking about just, that every child is rebellious. I'm saying that their children don't like you to do everything for them and to tell them no and to interfere with what they may want to do. And authority requires facing that resistance with a resolve to do what's truly best for the child when they're whining, when they're complaining, when they're crying, when they're pouting, whatever it is to say, well, my job is to do what's truly best for you. I was not fond of that responsibility. And if that was not enough, the responsibility of parental authority is to model God's authority, which I do believe is probably the most weighty part of the whole assignment of parenthood. Ephesians 6:4 says, bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord. In other words, your teaching and the way that you lead, the way you exercise this authority is to model the Lord's authority. You think about passages like 2 Corinthians chapter 6 in verse 18, which is one of many, many passages that has this idea, where God says, I will be a father to you, and you shall be my sons and daughters. What's he saying there? He's saying, this is the relationship that I want to have with you. The type of relationship that I want to have with you, you already know about because your parents modeled that relationship, or at least they were supposed to. That was the responsibility that I gave them. The way that children view God is largely dependent upon the way their parents exercised authority in their home. That is heavy stuff. That is heavy stuff. It's critical to properly handle the authority entrusted to us as parents so that our kids will not just be well-behaved children and polite citizens, but they'll learn to have the proper respect for God and the proper love for God. Big responsibility. Big responsibility. The text says, bring them up in the training of the Lord. That word training has the idea of curbing passions by means of correction. At least that's the way Thayer's defined it. Curbing passions by means of correction. And it's usually used that way. It's used as in a corrective sense. As a matter of fact, a lot of times the word is translated in our English Bibles chastening. In Hebrews chapter 12, verses 5 through 8, it's used over and over there. It may be worded a little differently depending on what version you're reading. But if Hebrews chapter 12, verse 5, have you forgotten the exhortation which speaks to you as sons? Now, again, this is drawing upon that your relationship with your earthly parents helps prepare you for your relationship with your heavenly Father. Have you forgotten that the exhortation which speaks to you as sons, my son, do not despise the chastening, there's our word, of the Lord, nor be discouraged when you are rebuked by him. For whom the Lord loves, he chastens, and scourges every son whom he receives. If you endure chastening, God deals with you as sons. For what son is there whom a father does not chasten? But if you are without chastening, of which all have become partakers, then you are illegitimate and not sons. Furthermore, we've had human fathers who corrected us. Now, it's translated with a different English word there, but it's the same Greek word. Chastens us, trains us, corrects us, and we paid them respect. Shall we not much more readily be in subjection to the Father of spirits and live? For indeed, for a few days, for a few days chastened as seemed best to them, but he for our profit, that we may be partakers of his holiness. Now, no chastening seems to be joyful for the present, but painful. Nevertheless, afterward it yields the peaceable fruit of unrighteousness for those who have been trained by it. And we come back and it uses the English word trained there at the end. So this idea of bringing him up in the training and admonition of the Lord has this corrective element to it. Entrusted in the responsibility of parenting is the responsibility of correction or discipline. And this text in Hebrews tells us no chastening, no discipline seems to be joyful for the present, but painful. To who? Well, the kid immediately says, that's painful to me. And that's right. But what do parents tell you? This is going to hurt me more than it hurt you. And you don't believe that. But when you become a parent, you realize, yeah, I think it's more painful for me than it is for them. I didn't want that responsibility. But that responsibility comes with being a parent. And let me tell you this, God expects parents to be disciplinarians. He expects parents to be disciplinarians. Our day and time, that's being lost. Parenthood is not seen so much as being disciplinarian. I know there are abuses, and we want to address that as well. But we need to understand God expects parents to be disciplinarians and to model his discipline. And let me tell you this, he does hold us accountable for that. As parents, we cannot say, well, I'm not good at discipline. Well, I just can't bring myself to do that. We can't do that. God says, I'm going to ask you about this. I'm going to hold you accountable for this. You're responsible for discipline. That is part of the responsibility that I'm giving you. Proverbs 19, verse 18. Proverbs has a lot to say about this. We'll just look at 3 passages quickly. Proverbs 19, verse 18. Chasten your son while there is hope, and do not set your heart on his destruction. I want you to notice something about this passage. Yes, the first part is instruction, a command. Chasten your son while there is hope. But the second part of this, I want you to understand that parents, notice the accountability, the the accountability that parents have in this. Do not set your heart on his destruction. See, you're responsible in this for whether he will be destroyed or not, depending upon how you discipline. Proverbs 13 and verse 24, he who spares his rod hates his son, but he who loves him disciplines him promptly. Your love for your child is demonstrated in discipline. Or your hate for your child is demonstrated in discipline. Proverbs 23, 13 and 14, do not withhold correction from a child. For if you beat him with a rod, he will not die. You shall beat him with a rod and deliver his soul from hell. Here's the responsibility. You have the opportunity to deliver his soul from hell or to push him in that direction. As parents, if we fail to train or correct or chasten, we are responsible for setting a child on a course that could lead to their destruction, physically and spiritually. Heavy responsibility. 1 Samuel chapter 3 and verse 13, we just covered this in the Bible class not too long ago. Eli, the high priest, the judge. God held him accountable for the wickedness of his sons. The text says, his sons made themselves vile, and he did not restrain them. God said, yes, you're their father. I entrusted you with the position of authority to discipline them, to restrain them, and you did not do so. God held them accountable. But we mentioned, it's easy to abuse this authority. We've seen that abused. We can't go to either extreme. We can't go to the extreme of being hands-off in discipline. We can't go to the extreme of abusing it. Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 4 says, do not provoke your children to wrath. In that same context of training them, correcting them. Don't do so in such a way that in Colossians he says to discourage them. But the idea is to bring out a harshness in them. Failing to exercise authority to discipline, we raise spoiled rebels. You fail to discipline, you'll have spoiled rebels. Abuse the authority to discipline, and you raise resentful rebels. A lot of risk there. A lot of risk there. I'm not a risk taker. But that's part of parenthood. And we've got to do it. We've got to rise to the occasion. Ephesians 6:4 says, bring them up in the admonition of the Lord. That word admonition, it has the idea of calling attention to. Hey, look at that. Pay attention to that. You see that? Notice that. What do you see the details of that? That's what admonition is to draw attention to something, to call attention to. God has given parents the responsibility of calling the attention of our children. Hey, Junior, I want you to notice what's really important. What's really the most important things. That's the job of bringing them up in the admonition of the Lord. What's really important in life. I want you to see what's really important in life. That's the job that God has given parents. Show your children what is the essential things in life. Make sure their attention is called to that. Isaiah 38 in verse 19. The Father shall make known your truth. Talking about God's truth to the children. That's the job. That's bringing them up in the admonition of the Lord. Make known your truth to the children. In Genesis chapter 18 in verse 19, God's talking about Abraham. And it says, for I have known Abraham, God's the one speaking, I have known Abraham in order that he may command his children and his household after them, that they keep the way of the Lord to do righteousness and justice, that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he's spoken to them. This is the task. Abraham's not even a parent yet, but he's about to be. And God says to him, I've known him that he may command his children and his household after him, that they keep the way of the Lord to do righteousness and justice. That's the responsibility of the parent. That's bringing them up in the admonition of the Lord. Command his children and his household after him. Psalm 78, 5 and 6. For God established a testimony in Jacob and appointed a law in Israel, which he commanded our fathers, that they should make them known to their children, that the generation to come might know them, the children who are to be born, that they may arise and declare them to their children. So this is the responsibility that God has given parents. It's a huge responsibility. Now let me tell you something that you know. That responsibility cannot be fulfilled just by bringing them to church for a few hours a week. That won't do it. That won't even come close to doing it. That's important, but that is not sufficient. It can't be done just by occasionally reading them a bedtime Bible story. That's good, but that won't do it. It requires 18 plus years of every day your goal being, hey, let's notice what's really important. Let's pay attention to what's really essential in life. Deuteronomy chapter 6, 6 through 9 gave the instruction, this is how that should look. These words which I command you today shall be in your heart. Number one, parents, if you're going to bring your children up in the admonition of the Lord, God's Word has to be in your heart. It has to be in your heart to the point that it's overflowing out of your heart. These words which I command you today shall be in your heart, and you shall teach them diligently to your children. You shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes, and you shall write them on the doorpost of your house and on your gates. Do you see the picture there? The picture there is this is a 24/7, 365, 18, 20-year responsibility. All the time, in all activities. Call the attention of your children to the things that are really the priorities, really the important things in life, and make it where it's just like you had it tattooed on your hand. Make it where every time you walk out, it's like, okay, yeah, here's my goal. My goal is to draw my children's attention to the things that are really important. It's just the fundamental staple of that period of your life. That's what's involved in that. Heavy responsibility. When I saw those two pink lines, I'm not at all saying that I grasp all the responsibility that it entailed. But I understood enough to know that this was going to require a total commitment, a sacrificial element, a sacrificial effort if I was going to shoulder that responsibility of being a parent. So, the next 3 days, I spent praying and fasting and trying to work through what this was going to look like for the rest of my life. And at the end of that time, I resolved myself to the task. My mission for the next 18, 20 years, whatever, was to shoulder the task of taking the souls of this child or children and to make sure that they were headed towards heaven. Now let me tell you, there's a lot of things as a parent that I've not done well at. I don't want to share those with you. But if you were to ask me one thing that I think that I got right, it would be that I understood that my primary concern in parenting was for my children to put God first. That my primary concern was for my children to put God first. My primary concern as a parent was not to have an enjoyable relationship with my children. Though that's tempting, I knew that pursuit often hinders what must be my primary concern. My primary concern as a parent was not for my children to be happy. Though tempting, I know that pursuit is often a hindrance to what must be my primary concern. My primary concern as a parent was not to give my children the things that I didn't have as a child. Though tempting, that pursuit is often a hindrance to what must be the primary pursuit. My primary concern as a parent was not to live my dreams through my children. Though tempting, Austin could have made a great motocross racer. Though tempting, that pursuit is often a hindrance to what must be the primary concern. My primary concern as a parent was not to support them in their dreams. Now right there, a lot of Americans go, what? Let me say that again. My primary concern as a parent was not to support them in their dreams. Though tempting, that pursuit is often a hindrance to what must be the primary concern. My primary concern as a parent was not for them to be socially acceptable, because that pursuit can often be a hindrance to the primary concern. My primary concern as a parent was not for them to be successful athletes, because that pursuit is often a hindrance of what must be the primary pursuit. My primary concern as a parent was not for them to be attractive, for that pursuit is often a hindrance to what must be the primary concern. My primary concern as a parent was not for them to be successful academically, for the same reason. My primary concern as a parent was not for them to enjoy their youth, for that pursuit is often a hindrance to what must be the primary concern. My primary concern as a parent was not for them to be financially comfortable. Although tempting, that is not a pursuit that will accomplish the responsibility that God gave. My primary concern as a parent was not for my children to grow up to be respectable citizens. Although tempting, that pursuit is often a hindrance to what must be my primary concern. My primary concern as a parent was for my children to love God with all of their heart, with all of their soul, and with all of their mind. When I remembered that, I did well. I made better choices. I made better choices about how I spent my time. I made better choices about what activities I involved my family in. I made better choices about what lessons I tried to emphasize to my children. When I forgot that, I did poorly. My primary concern as a parent must be for my children to put God first. To put God first. If we can remember that our primary mission as parents is to bring up our children in the training and admonition of the Lord and not get distracted from that mission by all the tempting distractions, like the list that we just went through. If we can keep that as our primary mission, then we'll be able to face 18 plus years of fulfilling the responsibility that God gives us as parents. As heavy and weighty as that responsibility is, if we can remember that and make our choices upon that, we can fulfill that responsibility entrusted to us. I didn't want that responsibility at 21 years old, but the Lord gave it to me nonetheless. And choosing to fully commit to that responsibility has shaped me to be more of what I needed to be. It taught me more about God. It taught me more about myself. It taught me more about others. It's been a blessing and a very rewarding in this life, and I trust that it has eternal reward as well. No doubt the most traumatic event of my life Also probably the greatest blessing of my life, because it's drawn me closer to God. Let me say this to the parents and to the grandparents. Let me exhort us. Remember our mission. Remember our mission and stay on task. And let's help each other in shouldering the responsibility of bringing up our children in the training and admonition of the Lord. Because it's worth it. And God knew it was worth it. And that's why He set up things the way that He did and gave the instruction that He did. This morning, maybe as you've thought about this, you've thought about what life is really all about and how you're doing in keeping your priorities where they need to be and focused on the really important things. Do not forsake the assembling of yourselves together as the manner of some, but exhort one another, so much more as you see the day approaching. Stir up love and good works in one another. That's what we're here to do. Can we help you in that? Can we encourage and strengthen you to be more what you need to be? To get your priorities right, to make correction, to resolve that from here on, I'm going to love the Lord my God with all of my heart, with all of my soul, and with all my mind. I'm going to put God first, and I'm going to make decisions based upon that, and I'm going to live my life based upon that, and I'm going to be obedient and submissive to Him, and I'm going to be what He wants me to be. Can we help you in that? That's what we're here to encourage each other to do. And if we can do that, please make that known by coming forward, letting us help you while we stand and while we sing. Thanks for watching. If you found this video to be beneficial, please follow us on Facebook or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Feel free to share it with others that you feel like may benefit from it. If you need to contact us, please contact us via email at quinn.church@yahoo.com. Also, if you're in the area, we would love for you to come visit with us at one of our assemblies. Have a good day.